Have you ever wondered what would happen if one small act of kindness changed not just one life, but three? A poor mechanic, alone in a snowy town, stumbles upon a shivering woman and her two children by the tracks. She says she's a widow. She says she's lost everything. But what she doesn't say is the truth. Behind her gentle eyes lies a secret powerful enough to bring down billionaires and dangerous enough to get her killed. This is a story of second chances, of love that grows in the quiet, of a man who thought his life was over until he found a reason to begin again. So grab a warm drink, settle in, and let this story carry you through snowstorms, secrets, and the healing power of home. But before we begin, if stories of love, resilience, and hope speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'd love to have you here for the next chapter. Now, let's begin. A poor mechanic found a widow and her twins by the tracks. She was hiding a shocking secret. The wind howled like a restless ghost through the skeletons of trees lining the old railroad tracks. Snow fell steadily, blanketing the small town of Pine Hollow in a hush that muffled even the ticking of time. Winter had arrived early that year, hard and unforgiving. Caleb Foster tightened his coat and stepped out of the garage. The crunch of snow beneath his boots, the only sound besides the wind. It was nearly midnight, but he couldn't sleep. The space heater in his loft apartment above the workshop had sputtered out again, and the silence felt heavier than usual. He lit a cigarette with gloved fingers, more out of habit than desire. The smoke rose into the cold air like a prayer half whispered. Just as he turned to go back inside, he heard it, a sound, faint, desperate, rising above the wind. He paused. It came again. A soft, high-pitched wail. A child. Maybe two. Caleb dropped the cigarette, crushed it into the snow, and jogged toward the sound, his breath visible in thick clouds. The noise was coming from the old railway siding, a stretch of forgotten track behind the garage where derelict train cars had been rusting since the 80s. He rounded the back corner of the lot, boots slipping on the ice, and saw it. Dim movement near one of the abandoned boxcars. Something, or someone, was there. "Hello?" he called out, instinctively raising a hand. "You okay out there?" No answer, but the crying intensified. Caleb approached slowly, heart thudding. Inside the open doorway of the boxcar, shadows shifted. He climbed up the metal step and pulled his flashlight from his coat pocket. The beam cut through the gloom. And there, curled into the far corner of the boxcar, was a woman. She sat hunched against the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around two small children. A boy and a girl, twins from the look of them. They were bundled in mismatched coats and scarves, their faces red from the cold, their eyes wide and tear-streaked. The woman looked up, blinking against the light. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw and brittle. "We just needed somewhere to stay warm." Caleb lowered the flashlight. "You're freezing," he said, stepping forward. "You need to come inside. I've got heat, food. You can't stay out here." She clutched the children closer. "We'll leave in the morning. We're not looking for trouble." "Lady," he said gently, "you won't make it till morning out here." A long silence passed between them, broken only by the sniffles of the children. Then slowly the woman nodded. Caleb took off his coat and draped it over the little boy, who was shivering hard. "Come on, it's just around the corner." She rose with difficulty, knees stiff from cold. Caleb offered his hand to steady her, and she hesitated, just for a moment, before taking it. The walk back was quiet. The snow had thickened, turning the world into a pale blur. Caleb led them into the garage through the side door, where the old space heater coughed and rumbled in a corner. "It's not much," he said as he pulled blankets from a storage shelf. "But it's warm, and it's dry." The woman knelt beside the heater, pulling the children into her lap. The warmth made them whimper and curl closer. Caleb poured water into a kettle and placed it on the hot plate. "I've got instant oatmeal. It's not gourmet, but it's something." She looked up at him, eyes glassy and cautious. "Thank you," he nodded. "Name's Caleb. Foster." "Hannah," she said after a beat. "And these are Lila and James." The twins had stopped crying. The little girl, Lila, stared at him with solemn brown eyes, her thumb resting near her mouth. "They're four," Hannah added. "We've been traveling." "In this weather?" She didn't answer. Her gaze dropped to the heater. He didn't push. 15 minutes later, the small group sat around an old workbench, eating oatmeal with spoons Caleb had cleaned with care. Hannah sat straight-backed, still tense. Caleb noticed the tremble in her hands. Trauma, not just cold. "You from around here?" he asked softly. "No," she said. "Just passing through." Caleb gave a single nod, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. Lila tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can we stay here?" Hannah looked stricken. "Just tonight," she said gently. "We don't want to bother Mr. Foster." "It's no bother," Caleb said, surprising even himself. "You can stay until the weather clears. I've got space upstairs. It's not fancy, but it's better than a boxcar." Hannah's eyes lifted. For a second, they softened, as if the weight she carried had been shifted slightly off her shoulders. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead, she just nodded. "Thank you," she murmured. "I don't know what we would have done." Caleb didn't reply. He simply rose, fetched more blankets, and climbed the stairs to prepare the loft. But long after they had gone to bed, he stood by the window staring into the snow. Strangers didn't just appear by the tracks in the dead of night, and mothers didn't hide their children in boxcars unless they were running from something worse than the cold. He didn't know her story, but he intended to find out. The loft above the garage smelled faintly of motor oil and cedar. A single iron frame bed stood against the far wall, layered in mismatched quilts that had seen better years. Beside it, an old dresser leaned slightly to one side, one drawer forever stuck halfway open. The windows were fogged over with condensation, blurring the snowstorm outside into a soft white haze. Caleb Foster moved quietly as he spread out an extra mattress on the floor and folded blankets for the children. He'd lived in this space for 6 years, alone, with only the hum of his tools and the whistle of the wind through broken panes for company. Now 3 strangers were huddled under his roof, and the silence felt different, warmer somehow. Downstairs, the old heater still thumped rhythmically. He glanced toward the loft's open stairway, half expecting to hear them getting settled, but all was still. When he returned downstairs, he found Hannah curled on the worn couch in the corner of the garage office. Lila and James asleep on either side of her, their heads resting on her lap like twin kittens. A single lamp cast a golden circle over them, and the snow outside swirled like feathers behind the window glass. She looked up as he entered, her eyes shadowed but more alert than earlier. "They're out cold," she whispered. "Didn't even finish their oatmeal." He nodded and lowered his voice to match hers. "They needed rest." Hannah smoothed a hand over James's soft curls, her expression unreadable. "So did I, but I don't think I'll get much tonight." Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to push, but she looked fragile. Not just tired, but stretched thin, like a sheet pulled too tight on an old mattress. "You're safe here," he said at last. Her eyes lingered on him for a long moment, studying, weighing. "That's a kind thing to say," she murmured. "Kindness is rare lately." Caleb gave a small shrug. "Maybe you've been looking in the wrong places." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was shared, a space between them that didn't need filling. After a few beats, he moved toward the kitchenette. "There's hot water upstairs," he said without turning, "if you want to clean up. And the bed's yours. I'll take the couch." "No," Hannah said immediately. "I'm not kicking you out of your own bed." "You're not," he replied gently. "You're just borrowing it." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. I'd like that, but only if you're sure." He turned then, catching the flicker of hesitation in her voice. "I'm sure." She rose carefully, lifting one child in each arm, with the quiet grace of a mother who'd done it too many times to count. Caleb opened the stairs for her and waited until her footsteps disappeared above. Left alone, he stared into the heater's flickering orange core. The smell of burning dust filled the garage. Outside, the snow fell in sheets. He thought about how easily he could have missed them, how easily that boxcar could have become a coffin. He ran a hand down his face and exhaled through his nose. He didn't know what this woman's story was, but whatever it was, she'd come through hell to protect those kids, and he respected that. Upstairs, Hannah stood in the dim light of the loft, watching her children breathe softly in sleep. The weight of the borrowed warmth, the quilts, the heater, the man downstairs, pressed against the frozen place inside her chest. She tucked Lila's stuffed lamb closer to her, then stepped toward the bathroom. It was simple, clean. A cracked mirror above the sink, a worn towel neatly folded on the rack. As she washed her hands in warm water, she caught her reflection, pale, drawn, older than she remembered. Her dark hair was tangled, her eyes rimmed with fatigue. But beneath that, there was still a trace of her, Hannah Whitaker. Not just a widow, not just a fugitive, a woman who once sang lullabies without fear, who wore red lipstick to Sunday brunch, who once believed that love could outlast any storm. She pressed a towel to her face, inhaled the scent of old soap and rust, and felt the knot in her throat swell. But she didn't cry. Not yet. Later that night, Caleb lay on the couch with his boots off, arms folded beneath his head. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint creak of floorboards above, the occasional cough from one of the children. A life ago, he might have turned them away. Back when he still wore a wedding ring and had someone waiting at home. Back before cancer turned the woman he loved into a memory and their home into a hollow shell. But tonight, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. In the morning, Caleb was already downstairs when Hannah appeared at the top of the stairs. Her hair was damp, twisted in a loose braid. She wore one of his old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a pair of jeans that looked a size too big. But there was a freshness to her face that hadn't been there the night before. "Coffee?" he asked, lifting the pot. She nodded, smiling faintly. "God, yes." Lila and James came tumbling down behind her, chasing each other around an old tire display. Caleb crouched to their level and offered 2 clean mugs of warm milk. They took them like they were holding gold. "Do you always save stranded strangers?" Hannah asked, perching on the edge of a stool. "Only the ones with good taste in flannel," he replied. Her laugh was soft and fleeting, but it was real, and it changed the whole room. They ate together that morning, oatmeal again, this time with a little cinnamon he found in the back of a drawer. Caleb showed the twins a trick where he could balance a socket wrench on his nose, and they squealed with delight. Even Hannah smiled without worry for the first time. But behind her laughter, Caleb saw it. Something coiled tight. A truth she hadn't shared yet. A shadow that hadn't moved on. He didn't press. But he was starting to care. And that would change everything. The snow had eased overnight, leaving behind a world softened and hushed beneath a blanket of white. Sunlight broke through in muted gold, glinting off the frost-laced windows of the garage. Inside, the hum of life returned slowly, like the first breath after a long-held silence. Caleb stood under the open hood of a battered Dodge pickup, its engine purring back to life after 3 long weeks of patient tinkering. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced toward the corner of the garage where laughter rang out like wind chimes in the quiet air. Lila sat on an overturned paint bucket, clutching a toy wrench Caleb had given her that morning. James stood beside her, supervising with the seriousness only 4-year-olds could muster. Hannah, not far off, was sweeping sawdust into neat piles near the workbench. She'd insisted on helping that morning. "I need to feel useful," she'd said, and Caleb hadn't argued. There was something steadying in her presence, something that filled the gaps in his quiet routines without asking for permission. He watched her now, the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the gentle arc of her shoulders as she moved the broom. It had been a long time since someone else's rhythm had blended so naturally with his. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing with his chin. She looked up, mock offense in her eyes. "Excuse me? I'm a guest, remember?" "Guest duties include floor maintenance and toy wrench supervision," he replied, deadpan. She rolled her eyes but smiled. Noted. The ease between them surprised him. They had known each other for barely a day, yet the silence no longer felt like a wall. It was more like a shared language neither of them had spoken in years. "Caleb," she said after a pause, leaning on the broom, "why do you stay here, in this place?" He wiped grease from his palms and thought for a moment before answering. "Because it's quiet, because it doesn't expect anything from me." He looked toward the rolling hills beyond the garage window. "And because it's far enough away from everything I lost." Her smile faltered, just a little. "You lost someone?" He nodded. "My wife, Rachel. Cancer took her 6 years ago. Fast. Too fast." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "So am I," he replied with no trace of bitterness, just a quiet truth long since settled in his bones. Hannah turned her gaze to the window. I lost my husband too. Not to illness, though. There was something in the way she said it. Not cold, but distant, like she'd set that chapter on a high shelf and was hesitant to reach for it again. Caleb didn't ask more. He sensed the wall behind her words, the one built not of grief, but of caution. That afternoon, the snowplow finally cleared the main road. A delivery truck rumbled past, sending echoes through the quiet valley. It reminded Caleb that the outside world still turned, even when life inside his garage had frozen for years. Inside, the kettle hissed on the stovetop. Hannah poured 2 mugs of tea and passed one to Caleb, who sat beside the open garage door, watching the sunlight dance on melting icicles. You don't get many visitors, she said, sitting beside him. No, he said. Don't invite many. And yet you invited us. He looked at her. I didn't invite. I just didn't close the door. She tilted her head, studying him. Still, you didn't have to help. I know. So why did you? Caleb sipped his tea, steam curling around his jaw. Because I've been cold before. Not just winter cold. The kind of cold that makes you wonder if anyone would notice if you disappeared. She nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the mug. I know that kind too. For a while neither spoke. The quiet settled again. Not heavy, just real. Like snowfall that didn't need to be noticed to be beautiful. Later that evening, Caleb returned from town with a bag of supplies. Juice boxes, crayons, canned soup, and an extra pack of thermal socks. He found Hannah crouched beside the heater, showing the twins how to trace snowflakes on the foggy window pane with their fingers. Lila squealed with delight. James giggled when his breath made the fog disappear. Hannah looked up as Caleb entered, her eyes catching the warmth in his. You didn't have to, she said, glancing at the groceries. I know, he said, but I figured James could use socks that match. James, hearing his name, ran over and hugged Caleb's legs with fierce toddler affection. Caleb stood stiff for a beat, then slowly, awkwardly, rested a hand on the boy's back. I think he likes you, Hannah said, standing now. I'm no good with kid, he murmured. She raised an eyebrow. You're better than most I've met. A silence hung between them. Not awkward, not rushed. Just new. Then she said softly, Caleb, I want to pay you back for everything. You don't have to. I do, she insisted, not harshly, but with that quiet steel beneath her voice again. I've lived long enough to know nothing comes free. Not really. He looked at her, really looked, saw the lines beneath her eyes that grief had drawn, the tension in her shoulders even when she smiled. Then don't pay me back, he said. Just don't disappear without saying goodbye. Her mouth parted, surprised by the simplicity of it. You think I'd do that? I don't know, he admitted, but I've seen it happen. She stepped closer then, not quite touching him, but close enough for her voice to soften. I won't, she said. Not unless I have to. And Caleb knew, without needing to ask, that she wasn't speaking of inconvenience. She was speaking of something heavier, something that hadn't yet been named. But in that moment, with the heater humming and the twins drawing hearts in window fog, it was enough. That night, as the wind rose again beyond the garage walls, Caleb lay on the couch, listening to the creaks and whispers of a home slowly becoming more than just shelter. Upstairs, he imagined Hannah tucking the children into bed, whispering stories into the warm dark. He imagined her pausing at the top of the stairs, hand on the rail, wondering if she'd gone too far, or not far enough. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the only heartbeat in the room. The mornings came slowly in Pine Hollow. Winter sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows like pale honey, casting soft golden slivers across the concrete floor of the garage. Outside, the snow had crusted over in patches, brittle and sparkling under the early light. The world was quiet, still wrapped in a hush that only freshly fallen snow could hold. Caleb was already downstairs when the heater rattled to life, filling the space with its familiar hum. He stood at the sink near the back wall, rinsing grease from his hands with water just warm enough not to sting. Behind him, the smell of toast drifted from the small toaster oven. He had never thought of this place as a home. It was a refuge, a repair shop, a stopgap after his world collapsed. But now, with 2 sets of tiny boots drying by the door and a woman humming softly upstairs as she brushed her daughter's hair. Something had shifted. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was shared. By 8:30, the twins were chasing each other around the garage with a red rubber ball Caleb had unearthed from an old bin. Hannah was wiping down the small kitchenette, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back in a loose knot. "You don't have to clean everything," Caleb called over from the workbench, where he was assembling a new carburetor. She looked up, smiling faintly. "If I'm going to live in a place full of rust and mystery bolts, I at least want clean counters." Suit yourself," he said, "but you're spoiling the authentic charm." She gave him a look. "You mean the permanently dusty aesthetic? It's taken years to cultivate." She laughed, a quiet, lovely sound that curled through the garage like steam rising from a mug. By mid-morning, Hannah had set up a small reading nook for the kids in a corner of the loft. Just a few blankets, a milk crate of old magazines, and a flashlight. Lila was reading a parts manual with dramatic flair, while James colored inside an empty invoice book. Caleb passed by, pausing as he watched the children. His voice lowered. "They're good kids." Hannah, crouched nearby folding laundry, looked up. "They are. I don't know how I got so lucky." "Doesn't look like luck," he said, eyes flicking from her face to the neat pile of folded clothes. "Looks like work." She smiled softly. "It is, but the kind that matters." He nodded. She folded the last of the socks and set them aside, then sat back on her heels, gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, a snowplow passed along the main road. Hannah's eyes narrowed, a subtle stiffness creeping into her shoulders. Caleb didn't miss it. "You okay?" he asked. She turned toward him, her expression quickly smoothed. "Yeah, just habit, I guess. Keeping an eye on things." "Bad habit or good one?" "I'm not sure yet." He didn't push. She was still a woman with lines drawn around her life, lines he hadn't been invited to cross. But that didn't stop him from noticing the way she flinched every time a car slowed on the street, or how she always kept the children within arm's reach. People running from something tended to carry fear like a second skin. Later that day, Caleb ran errands in town, picked up more groceries, filled a propane tank, grabbed a few new coloring books for the kids without making it obvious. Pine Hollow was a small town, the kind where people noticed when someone new showed up or when someone like Caleb, famously solitary, began stocking juice boxes. As he stepped into the hardware store, he caught a familiar voice. "You hear about that woman with kids staying out by the old Foster garage?" Caleb froze. It was Earl, the barber, and next to him, Hank Redley, the man who ran the feed store. "Someone said she's hiding from something," Hank added, lowering his voice. "Don't know if it's true, but a woman don't just show up like that in a snowstorm." Caleb stepped forward, casual but firm. "Morning, Earl." "Hank." Both men turned, startled. "Just picking up a few things," Caleb said evenly, setting a pack of bolts on the counter. Neither man said anything more until he'd paid and left, but Caleb could feel their eyes on his back as he walked out. Outside, he paused, breath clouding the air. The wind had picked up, slicing through his coat. The gossip had already started, and that meant Hannah's time here might be shorter than he hoped. When he got back, she was standing on the porch, arms folded tight across her chest, watching the road. She turned as he approached. "Did something happen? Why? You look tense." Caleb hesitated, then stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "Some talk going around in town. About you." Her face went still. "What kind of talk?" "People asking questions. Who you are. Why you're here." She looked away, blinking hard. "Of course, I shouldn't have stayed this long." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Her voice was quiet, but it shook. "People always talk. That's how it starts." Caleb touched her elbow gently. "You don't have to go." She shook her head. "Yes, I do. I've learned that the longer we stay, the more dangerous it becomes. For them." Her eyes flicked toward the loft where the twins were playing. "What are you running from, Hannah?" Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she turned and walked inside. Caleb followed her to the kitchen, watching as she busied herself rinsing a mug that didn't need cleaning. "I'm not asking to pry," he said. "I'm asking because I care." She stilled, her hand resting on the edge of the sink. When she looked at him, her eyes were tired. "It's not just me," she said. "There are people, dangerous ones, who don't want me talking, who think I know too much about something I never wanted to be part of. Caleb's jaw tensed. And you're protecting your kids. She nodded once. Every day. He leaned against the counter, arms folded. If I asked you to stay, just a little longer, would you? She didn't answer right away. But when she finally looked up, there was a flicker in her eyes. Reluctant hope, maybe, or the last bit of strength she hadn't yet spent. Maybe, she said quietly. If you meant it. I do. They stood there in silence, the heater humming in the background, the snow melting into slow, steady drips off the eaves outside. Sometimes shelter wasn't a place, it was a person who stayed. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the man arrived. The kind of day where the sky looked too clean, too blue, deceptively calm above a world still holding its breath beneath snow-laced roofs and frozen ground. Caleb noticed the car first. A black sedan, not local, too polished for Pine Hollow, where trucks wore dust like badges of honor. It pulled into the diner across from the hardware store, tires crunching on salt-stained pavement. From behind the window of the auto parts shop, Caleb paused mid-step, a socket wrench in one hand, a receipt in the other. Then he saw him. The man who stepped out wore a long, dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat, charcoal gray, pulled low over his brow. His boots were polished, his gloves leather. He didn't look like a tourist, didn't look like someone lost. He looked like someone searching. Word traveled faster than traffic in Pine Hollow. By the time Caleb got back to the garage, he knew something was off. The diner waitress, Sandy, had said the man asked too many questions. Not about food, not about directions, about people. More specifically, about a woman with 2 kids. A woman new in town. A widow. Possibly hiding. Caleb didn't mention it to Hannah right away. He needed time to think. Time to figure out if this was just coincidence or the past finally catching up. But when he stepped inside the garage and found Hannah standing at the window, her face pale, her body perfectly still, he didn't have to ask. You saw him, he said. She nodded slowly. The car. I recognize it. Same one? Yes. Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled. It followed us once, in Pennsylvania. I lost it 3 towns back, or thought I did. Caleb stepped closer. Who is he? She swallowed hard. I don't know exactly, but I know who sent him. They sat at the kitchen table in the corner of the shop. The twins were upstairs napping, the heater humming low. Caleb poured 2 mugs of coffee, slid one toward her, and waited. Hannah stared into the steam for a long time before speaking. My husband's death wasn't just sudden, she said. It was suspicious, but no one wanted to touch it. He worked for a financial firm based in Chicago. Big money, offshore accounts, names with power. Caleb listened, steady. When he died, I found a USB drive hidden in our attic, she continued. It had records, transactions, names, routing numbers. At first, I didn't understand it, but someone else did. She looked up at him now, her voice a whisper. Someone broke into my house 2 nights later. His jaw clenched. Were you hurt? No, but the door was broken. The twins were screaming, and I knew I had to go. I grabbed what I could and ran. She shook her head. I've been running ever since. Why not go to the police? I tried, once, but the detective I spoke to turned up dead 3 days later. Her hands tightened around the mug. I can't trust anyone. I don't know who's involved or how far this goes. Caleb sat back, letting the weight of her story settle. It wasn't a tale told for drama. It was lived, worn, etched into the slump of her shoulders and the dark crescents beneath her eyes. I'm sorry, she said after a long silence. You didn't ask for this. No, he said, but I also didn't ask for you to walk into my life, and I'm glad you did. She blinked, startled. Even with all this? Especially with all this, he said quietly. Because you didn't run from it. You ran to protect your kids. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. You're not alone anymore, Hannah. That evening, Caleb made a quiet call from the garage's old landline. He rarely used it anymore, but tonight, he needed a voice he trusted. Andy, it's Caleb. Caleb Foster. The voice on the other end was scratchy but familiar. You finally crawled out of that cave you call a shop. Wish this was a social call, Caleb said. I need help. Andy Keller had been Pine Hollow's sheriff 15 years back, before retiring to a cabin by the lake. He was the kind of man who kept old secrets and newer weapons, and didn't blink when things got messy. When Caleb explained the situation, carefully without names, Andy didn't flinch. "Think this guy's still around town?" he asked. "Pretty sure. Diner waitress said he asked about a woman and kids." "I'll look into it, discreetly." "Appreciate it. You be careful, Caleb," Andy said after a pause. "Sounds like the kind of trouble that doesn't knock twice." Caleb hung up, staring at the phone for a long moment. Then he locked the garage doors and double-checked the windows. Upstairs, the loft was dim. The kids had fallen asleep in the makeshift bed, arms tangled, breathing soft and slow. Hannah stood by the window, her face turned toward the streetlight that glowed faintly through the snowfall. "He's still out there, isn't he?" she asked. "Maybe," Caleb said. "But he's not getting in here." She didn't turn. "You should have let me go when I had the chance. I didn't want you to go." "You still might." Caleb stepped closer. "I won't." She turned then, her expression tight with fear and gratitude. "You don't know what you're stepping into." "No," he said, his voice low. "But I know who I'm stepping in for." And that finally broke something in her. Not loudly, not all at once, but her shoulders softened and her arms dropped to her sides. She closed the gap between them and rested her forehead gently against his chest. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I know," he said, folding his arms around her. "Rest now. I've got this." Outside, the snow fell quietly, indifferent to secrets, to danger, to men in gray hats and long coats. But inside the garage, beneath its rusted roof and flickering heater, a promise had been made, and Caleb Foster had never been one to break his word. The next morning arrived wrapped in quiet, the kind of stillness that came not just from snowfall, but from the space between decisions, when something had shifted, but no one had spoken it aloud. A sky the color of pearl hung low over Pine Hollow. Fat, slow flakes drifted lazily through the air, as if time had slowed to a hush. Caleb stood in the garage, his hands deep in a toolbox, though he wasn't looking for anything. Behind him, the gentle clatter of breakfast plates and the murmur of children's laughter filtered down from the loft. It was a domestic sound, a sweet, echoing rhythm that tugged at something inside him. But underneath it all, a question throbbed. Who was Hannah Whitaker, really? She came down not long after, cheeks pink from the loft's warmth, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She moved easily, naturally, pouring coffee as if she'd been doing it for years in that kitchen corner. "Kids are building a fort with tire covers and half your blankets," she said, handing him a mug. "Hope you're okay with that." He smiled. "If it keeps them out of my socket drawer, I'll allow it." She returned the smile, but her eyes lingered on his face a moment too long, as if searching for something behind his quiet. "You didn't sleep," she said gently. "I had things on my mind." "Like what?" He paused, then stepped away, setting his mug on the counter. "Like the man in the hat, and why he's asking questions about a woman with twins in a town nobody visits in winter." Her posture tensed, slight but clear. "I told you." "I know," he interrupted, not unkindly. "And I believe you. But there's still a lot you haven't told me, Hannah." Silence. She walked over to the window, arms folded loosely, watching the snow settle on the hood of an old Chevy outside. Her voice, when it came, was steady but laced with something brittle. "I didn't lie to you. I didn't say you did. But you think I'm holding something back?" He hesitated. "I think you've lived in survival mode for so long. You don't know how to stop running, even when someone's offering to help." She turned to him then, eyes dark with exhaustion and something deeper. Shame, maybe, or guilt. "You're right." She walked to the table, sat down slowly. Her shoulders sagged as if putting down a weight she'd carried too far. "There's something I didn't tell you about the drive, the records I found." Caleb sat across from her, quiet, patient. "It wasn't just banking logs," she said. "It was names, government contracts, shell companies funneling money into defense deals that didn't exist." Caleb frowned. "Military? Private firms posing as military, funding arms movements overseas. My husband, he wasn't just an investor. He was a broker." Her voice wavered. "And I think he was planning to come forward." "And that's why they killed him." She nodded. And why they think I might too. Caleb leaned back, taking that in. The story sounded unbelievable, on paper. But looking at her, at the way her voice trembled and her hands twisted the fabric of her sleeve, he didn't doubt a word. So why not hand it over now? Why not go to someone you can trust? She looked up. Who, Caleb? Who do you trust when the people you're supposed to trust are the ones covering it up? He had no answer. Later that day, Caleb drove into town for supplies. He made sure Hannah stayed in the garage. The doors locked, the windows curtained. He even showed her where he kept the old rifle behind the cabinet. Just in case, he'd said, though his eyes had spoken a deeper warning. At the general store, he kept his ears open. No sign of the man in the hat, but people were talking, quietly, curious. One woman whispered to another about that pretty girl with the twins. Another asked if Caleb had taken her in, or if it was something else. He bought bread, milk, and 2 extra locks for the side doors. When he left, he saw a black car parked on the edge of town. Engine idling. Driver unseen. His stomach twisted. That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the old metal siding of the garage. Upstairs, the kids slept soundly, curled like puppies under Caleb's patched blankets. Hannah sat on the edge of the couch, a steaming mug in her hands. Caleb leaned against the workbench, arms folded. They're watching again, he said. Saw the car near the diner. Same make. She didn't look surprised, only tired. We can't stay, she said softly. You know that. He didn't answer. I've brought danger to your door. I didn't mean to, but I'm not asking you to apologize. I am sorry. Caleb stepped closer. You're not the problem, Hannah. The people chasing you are. Her voice cracked. I don't want you hurt because of me. Or worse, because of my children. He looked down for a moment, collecting himself, then met her eyes. Don't push me out of this. You don't get to carry this alone anymore. She stared at him, really stared, and something in her shifted. Something raw and long hidden, peeking out behind walls she hadn't meant to build. You're the first person, she whispered, in years that I wanted to believe. Then do. Her hands were shaking. She set the mug down and stood. I don't know how to stop running. Start by standing still, he said, right here. A long breath passed between them, thick with unspoken things. Then slowly, as if pulled by some quiet gravity, she stepped into his arms. She didn't cry. She just leaned in. And for a long, silent moment, the world outside the garage faded. It was just the two of them. One woman trying to stop running, and one man finally letting someone in. The power flickered just after midnight. A low hum, a dimming of the light bulb above the workbench, then darkness. The heater groaned, sputtered, and fell silent, leaving behind only the hollow whistle of wind through the old window panes. Caleb sat up on the couch instantly, instincts sharpened from years of sleeping light. The garage was too quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't natural. He reached for the flashlight on the shelf, clicked it on, and swept the beam across the room. Nothing out of place, but his gut whispered a warning. Upstairs, floorboards creaked softly. Then Hannah's voice came low from the top of the stairs. Caleb? I'm here, he said, standing. Power's out. Her silhouette appeared in the shadows, a blanket around her shoulders. That's not normal, is it? The weather's calm. No, he said, already moving toward the breaker panel. It's not. Minutes later, he returned from outside, snow on his boots, jaw tight. Power's been cut. Deliberately. Hannah didn't answer right away. She stood by the window, peeking between the edges of the curtain. Her breath fogged the glass. They found us. Caleb ran a hand down his face. We don't know that. They cut the power, Caleb. Not the whole block. Just this building. Her voice was low, calm in the way people are when panic has settled too deep to rise. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Okay, he said. Then we don't wait. We act. By lantern light, they gathered the most important things: extra clothes, food, the burner phone, the USB drive Hannah had hidden beneath the false bottom of her duffel bag. She handed it to Caleb in silence, and he turned it over in his hand, suddenly aware of the weight it carried. Not physical, but moral, legal, dangerous. This has everything? He asked. Her voice was almost a whisper. Names, transactions, codes. There's enough in there to tear down empires. If anyone's willing to listen, honey, Caleb met her eyes. And if they're not, then I run again, she said softly. But I won't hide forever. He nodded once. Then we'll make sure someone listens. They woke the kids gently, bundled them in coats and boots without explaining too much. Hannah carried James. Caleb took Lila's hand. The girl didn't cry. She just looked up at him with quiet, unquestioning trust. It broke something in him, something old and rusted and sealed off for years. Outside, the snow had stopped, but a frost hung in the air, like breath not yet exhaled. Caleb's truck sat parked beneath a sheet of white. He brushed off the windshield with his forearm, started the engine, and loaded the kids into the back seat with blankets and snacks. Then he turned to Hannah. "We're not just driving," he said. "I called Andy." Her eyes widened. "The ex-sheriff? He'll meet us halfway to Colson's Ridge. He has a contact in the bureau, someone who still gives a damn." Hannah blinked hard. "And you trust him?" "With my life." She nodded. "Then I do too." The drive through the back roads was slow, headlights cutting tunnels through the dark. Trees loomed on either side of the highway, skeletal and silent. Every now and then, Caleb checked the rearview mirror. The black sedan wasn't there, but he still felt it, felt them. At the halfway point, they stopped near an old ranger's cabin, deep in the woods. Andy was already there, waiting in his beat-up truck, a thermos of coffee in hand and a sidearm on his hip. He raised a hand when Caleb pulled in, then climbed out with the stiffness of old injuries and long winters. "You look like you've been through a war," Andy muttered. Caleb nodded toward the truck. "They've been living in one." Andy's eyes shifted to Hannah, to the twins asleep in the back seat, and something in his weathered face softened. "She's got the drive?" he asked under his breath. Caleb handed it to him. "This is what they're after." Andy tucked it into his jacket. "I'll make the call tonight, quietly. I know someone who'll listen. Might not be fast, but it'll be real." "What about them?" Caleb asked. "They lay low. I've got a place out by the river. Used to be a hunting cabin. Nobody uses it anymore. It's off-grid." Caleb turned to Hannah. "It's safe." She looked up at him, eyes glassy with gratitude and something heavier, fear wrapped in trust. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I'm coming too." The cabin was small and simple, but warm. A wood stove, a cot, 2 old rocking chairs, a stack of books with dust jackets from the 70s. Caleb and Hannah settled the kids into sleeping bags on the floor near the fire. And finally, for the first time in what felt like years, there was stillness. Not silence from fear, but peace. Hannah stood by the fire, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes flickering with the flames. "You should hate me," she said quietly. Caleb looked up. "Why would I?" "Because you were safe before I showed up. Alone maybe, but not hunted. Not dragged into something you didn't ask for." He stood, stepped beside her. "You didn't drag me anywhere, Hannah. I walked in, eyes open." "I just wanted to keep them safe," she said, her voice catching. "You did," he said, "and now we finish what he started." She looked at him, startled. "You believe me?" "I believed you the second I saw you holding those kids in the snow." He paused. "You didn't look like a woman running from justice. You looked like a mother doing what no one else would." Tears brimmed in her eyes but didn't fall. She leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, and for the first time, Caleb didn't just feel responsible. He felt connected, as if the path that had led her to his garage wasn't random, but meant. Outside, the wind picked up again, rustling the branches high above the cabin roof. In the distance, a single owl called into the night. Inside, the fire crackled, and between them, a fragile but growing certainty began to take root. That maybe after all the running, the hiding, the cold, and the fear, they had finally stepped into something solid, a place where the truth no longer had to hide, a place where healing could begin. The days that followed were wrapped in quiet, not the suffocating kind Hannah had grown used to during years of running, but a quieter sort, gentler, almost sacred. Snow lined the banks of the frozen river behind the cabin, where pine trees bowed under the weight of white. Smoke curled from the chimney like a signal to the heavens. We're still here. We made it. Inside, life slowed into something unfamiliar. Lila and James built castles out of firewood and read old ranger manuals aloud as if they were fairy tales. Caleb spent his mornings chopping wood and checking the perimeter, and his evenings fixing a broken cabinet hinge or listening to the radio for a signal that never came. And Hannah watched it all like someone standing just outside a window, longing to believe it, afraid to let it in. One afternoon, she found Caleb seated on the porch steps, whittling a small piece of cedar with his pocket knife. The sun hovered low over the trees, throwing amber light across the snow-covered clearing. She walked out, pulling her coat tighter. He looked up and smiled. "You've been quiet today." She sat beside him. "It's strange," she said. "How quickly this place feels like a home. How quickly I'm afraid to lose it." He glanced down at the wood in his hand. "We're not out of the woods yet." "I know, but we're close," he added. She turned to look at him, her eyes cautious. "Andy's contact. Do you trust them?" Caleb nodded slowly. "Her name's Beth Lancer, FBI. Clean record, quiet operator. Andy worked with her on a few sting ops back in the day. She owes him one." Hannah exhaled, a mixture of hope and dread. "What if she turns on us? What if this goes higher than we think?" Caleb paused, then said gently, "Then we run again. Together this time." Hannah's breath caught. Together. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. That evening, after the kids had fallen asleep under a quilt of old maps and forest ranger patches, Caleb rolled out a sheet of paper across the table. He tapped a pen against the edge. "Here's the plan," he said. Hannah leaned over, eyes scanning the hand-drawn layout of roads, landmarks, and a meeting point circled in red. "We take the back route through Briar Hollow," Caleb explained. "Avoid the main roads. Beth will meet us at an old ranger station. Neutral ground. She's bringing 2 unmarked SUVs. Once she verifies the data, she'll take you and the kids into protective custody." Hannah's gaze lingered on the words, protective custody, like they were written in another language. "And you?" Caleb hesitated. "I'll wait. Stay behind. Watch the town. Make sure no one follows." Her brow furrowed. "Why wouldn't you come with us?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I'm not a ghost, Hannah. I have roots here. A life. This garage, this land. It's the only thing I have left." "And what if I want you to come with us?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He met her eyes then, slow and sure. "Then I'll come." Tears rose unbidden. Not from fear this time, but from the ache of something rare. Being chosen. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, wrapped in one of Caleb's flannels, watching the moonlight dance on the snow. Behind her, the cabin breathed with quiet warmth, the occasional creak of old wood, the sigh of wind brushing the windows. Caleb joined her silent as ever, hands in his coat pockets. "Couldn't sleep?" "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'd be worried if you weren't." She looked up at him. "Do you think we'll make it?" He was quiet a long moment. Then, "I think you've come too far not to." She turned toward him fully, standing close now. "What if something goes wrong? What if you don't come back?" "Then I'll fight to get back," he said. "And if I can't," he exhaled, "then I'll go down knowing I stood between you and the people who tried to break you." She closed her eyes. "I don't want you to stand between anymore. I want you with me." That broke something loose, gently, like thawed ice slipping into a river. He reached for her hand and she let him. And in that fragile moment between fear and faith, they stood in the doorway. 2 people who had every reason to walk away, choosing instead to stand still, together. The morning of the rendezvous came gray and cold. The kids were bundled tight, sleepy but calm. Hannah had packed light, just the essentials. A small bag of clothes, the USB drive now stored in Caleb's inside pocket, a photo of her and the twins at a Christmas market before the world turned upside down. They loaded into the truck just after dawn. The forest shimmered with frost, tree limbs creaking under the weight of winter. Caleb took the wheel, Hannah in the passenger seat, the kids in the back seat, heads against each other. For a long stretch, no one spoke. Then Hannah broke the silence. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for believing me, for staying." Caleb's eyes remained on the road, but his hand found hers and held tight. "I wasn't saving you, Hannah," he said. "You saved me too." They reached the rendezvous spot by late morning, a clearing with an old ranger tower and a gravel drive barely visible through the brush. Beth was already there, just as promised, leaning against a government-issued SUV in a black coat, her badge tucked inside her scarf. She looked calm, sharp-eyed, professional. Caleb didn't trust easily, but something in Beth's manner told him she wasn't here to play games. "Let's see it," she said without pleasantries. He handed her the USB. She pulled out a secured laptop, ran a silent scan, her eyes narrowing as files opened and names began to populate the screen. Her breath hitched. "My God, this is real." Hannah stepped forward. "Will you help us?" Beth looked up, eyes softer now. "You're not alone anymore. We'll protect you. But this will stir up a hornet's nest." "We're ready," Hannah said. Beth turned to Caleb. "You coming with them?" He looked at Hannah, then at the kids, then back at Beth. "Yes," he said. "I'm not letting them face this without me." Beth gave a slow nod. "Then let's get moving." As the SUV pulled away, Caleb looked out the window one last time at the road behind them, the trails of tire marks already filling with fresh snow. He didn't know what would come next. The headlines, the danger, the long, complicated road to justice. But beside him, Hannah held his hand. Lila and James leaned against his arm, and for the first time in years, he wasn't waiting for something to break. He was ready to build. The sound of the train whistle came low and distant, like a ghost returning to haunt the living. It echoed across the hills beyond Pine Hollow just after sunrise, rising from tracks that hadn't carried a passenger in years. A reminder of a time before everything changed, a time before hiding, before fear. For Hannah, it was the sound that marked the beginning, and now perhaps the end. They were back to the place where Caleb had first found her, and the twins huddled beneath snow and steel, tucked inside an abandoned boxcar like a forgotten secret. Only now they weren't running. They were ready. Beth's plan had been solid, but incomplete. The USB had triggered something deep within the Bureau, an internal firestorm of names too powerful to ignore. Before it could be fully contained, word had leaked, not to the press, but to the people who had the most to lose. Those people moved quickly, and someone had followed them. Caleb knew it before the SUV's engine even cooled. He stood near the edge of the tree line beside the abandoned railway, eyes sweeping the stillness. Pine Hollow was quiet, too quiet for a Tuesday. No cars on Main Street, no dogs barking, no shopkeepers opening early. It felt like breath held too long. Hannah stepped up beside him, her coat zipped to her chin, her eyes scanning the woods. "They're here," she said. He nodded once. "Yeah, I feel it too." "Why here?" Caleb glanced toward the rusted boxcar that still sat a few yards away, door half cocked like a mouth about to speak. "Because this is where you stopped running." She looked at him, her hand slipping into his. "Then this is where we finish it." The Bureau's rendezvous team had been delayed. Beth's contact sent a message just after dawn, interference on the road, a possible tail. They'd circle around, ETA unknown. That left Caleb and Hannah with time. Not much, just enough to prepare. They led the twins into the garage, the same place that had once sheltered them, and now stood as a line between past and future. The power was still off. Cut again, just like before. But the heater worked. The stove too. And Caleb had made sure the back door was locked, the windows covered. "Lila," he said gently, crouching to the little girl's level. "You remember how you liked to play hide and seek?" She nodded slowly, brown eyes wide. "I want you and James to hide upstairs, like we practiced. You stay quiet until Mommy or I come get you. Can you do that?" The twins nodded together, solemn, as if they understood more than they should. Hannah knelt and kissed each of them, whispering words too soft to hear, too sacred to repeat. Then she watched as they padded upstairs, holding hands. When she turned back to Caleb, her eyes were dry, but her hands trembled. "I never thought we'd have to fight," she said. "You fought every day," Caleb replied, loading shells into the rifle he'd taken from behind the cabinet. "You just did it with love." The black sedan arrived just before 9. It rolled to a stop across the street. No headlights, no sound beyond the crunch of gravel. 2 men stepped out, dressed in dark coats, calm as accountants. One wore gloves. The other wore nothing but a faint smile. Caleb watched from the garage window, his breath quiet. "Recognition?" he asked. Hannah stood beside him. Her eyes narrowed. "The one on the right." He used to work for Marcus, my husband. Security detail, but unofficial. A private contractor? Worse, she said. Cleaner. Caleb didn't look away. They won't get to you. I'm not worried about me. The two men didn't approach right away. They circled, watching, measuring, as if deciding whether to torch the place or knock politely. Caleb stepped outside, slow and deliberate, his hands visible. Can I help you? He called. The man with the gloves smiled faintly. We're looking for someone. Wrong address, Caleb said. The second man stepped forward. You're Caleb Foster. We know who you are, and we know who you're protecting. Caleb tilted his head. If you're looking for someone to intimidate, you picked the wrong mechanic. The first man let out a soft chuckle. We're not here to hurt anyone. We just want what was stolen. Stolen? Caleb asked. The drive, the man said. It doesn't belong to her. It doesn't belong to any of you either. A pause, cold and sharp. Then the man shrugged. We can be patient, but not forever. Caleb took one step closer. She's not alone anymore. You want that drive? You'll have to go through me. The man's smile faded. We intend to. It happened fast. The moment Caleb turned back toward the garage, the second man pulled a sidearm from beneath his coat. But Caleb had moved first. A shot rang out, echoing like thunder through the valley. The second man fell to his knees, gun clattering across the ice. The man with gloves dove behind the sedan, returning fire toward the garage door. Inside, Hannah ducked low, pulling the rifle Caleb had left leaning by the window. One shot, two. Silence. Then footsteps, rushing from the alley beside the garage. Another figure appeared. Not Caleb. A third man, unknown, charging in with a knife drawn. Hannah fired once. The man dropped. Then out of the haze of gun smoke and broken glass, Caleb emerged. Blood on his arm, a cut along his cheek, but breathing, alive. Beth arrived 7 minutes later. Her SUV skidded into the clearing, agents pouring out like rain. Guns drawn, badges raised, too late for the worst of it, but just in time to finish it. The man in gloves was cuffed and silent. The others, either dead or dying, lay sprawled across the snow. Beth rushed to Caleb's side. You okay? He nodded, grimacing. Got a graze. Nothing worse than a wrench slip. She turned to Hannah. The kids? Safe, she said. Upstairs. They didn't see any of it. Beth looked around, her face a tight mask of fury and disbelief. You two just held off a corporate hit team with a hunting rifle and a garage heater. Caleb shrugged. Welcome to Pine Hollow. Later, as medics treated Caleb's arm and agents secured the scene, Hannah stood in the garage doorway, looking out at the tracks that disappeared into the woods beyond. The whistle of that ghost train had long since faded, but she could still hear it, echoing through her chest. Not a warning this time, a release. She felt Caleb step beside her. His hand brushed hers. It's over, he said. No, she corrected softly. It's beginning. The seasons passed slowly in Pine Hollow. Winter melted into a quiet spring. Snow gave way to thawed mud, then wildflowers. The pines bloomed again. The sky stretched wider, bluer. And the garage, once echoing with the sound of strangers learning to trust, fell back into its familiar silence. But it was a different kind of silence now. Less hollow, more waiting. Like something once filled with music that had paused, not ended. Caleb Foster spent his days as he always had, tinkering, fixing, welding together the broken pieces of old things. He was good at it, always had been. The garage, the tools, the smell of grease and rust, it grounded him. But now he found himself pausing between jobs, eyes lingering too long on the loft window or on the empty stairs where two children used to race each other to breakfast. The old flannel shirt she used to wear hung on a hook behind the door. He never moved it. Didn't need to. It still smelled like her. After the attack, everything happened fast. Beth had kept her word. The data was verified, exposed. Headlines rolled out over the course of months. Congressional hearings, firings, sealed courtrooms, handcuffs on men who once seemed untouchable. It was messy, dangerous. But Hannah's testimony had cracked open a hidden world, and the Bureau had kept her safe. Relocation had been non-negotiable. New names, new town, new lives. They offered Caleb a chance to disappear too. He declined. Not because he wanted distance, but because someone had to stay rooted, to keep the memory of what happened real, to wait, just in case she came back. The letters helped. At first they were short, sparse, vetted and redacted by the Bureau. But over time they grew longer, more personal. Hannah would write about the kids, how Lila was learning to play piano, how James had fallen in love with dinosaurs, how they still talked about Mr. Caleb and the heater fort. She didn't say where they were, but Caleb didn't need to know. The handwriting alone brought him comfort, steady, familiar curves. She always signed the same way. Stay warm. Love, H. One night in early October, the first cold wind blew through the valley, scattering gold leaves across the gravel drive. Caleb stood on the porch, coffee in hand, wrapped in a fleece jacket too thin for the season. He liked the sting of the air. It reminded him he was alive. Behind him the garage was quiet, save for the steady tick of the wall clock. Time still passing. Andy came by once a week now, partly out of friendship, partly out of quiet concern. "You could start over," Andy had said once, sipping coffee on the porch. "New town, new woman. You're not that old, Caleb." Caleb had chuckled. "Feels like I've lived 2 lifetimes." Andy gave him a long look. "Then maybe it's time to start the third." But Caleb wasn't sure he could, because every version of a future he imagined still had her in it. On the first snowfall of November, Caleb received the final letter. It wasn't long, only a few lines. "Dear Caleb, they've cleared me. The trial's done. I can speak freely again. The kids are healthy. We're okay. But there's something missing, something we left behind in the snow. We're coming home. Stay warm. Love, H." He read it 3 times. Then he set it on the counter, stared out the window, and laughed. Quietly, joyfully. The kind of laugh that comes after holding your breath for a year. He waited, not with impatience, but with reverence. He cleaned the garage, painted the loft, bought a new table and chairs for 4, replaced the old rusted heater with a safer, quieter model, just in case. And every day he listened for the sound of an engine on the gravel. A knock at the door, a small voice calling his name. It came on a Tuesday, cold, quiet, dusted with snow. The sound of tires crunching the drive made his heart stutter. He wiped his hands on a rag, stepped outside just as the old SUV pulled to a stop near the pump. The door opened. 2 small figures jumped out first. Lila and James, taller now, their faces brighter but familiar. "Mr. Caleb!" Lila shouted, running toward him. He knelt instinctively, arms open, and caught both children as they flung themselves into him, breathless and warm. He held them close, buried his face in their hair, and felt his chest tighten with something so big it nearly broke him. Then he heard her. "Hey!" He looked up. Hannah stood beside the open car door, hands in her coat pockets, hair a little longer, eyes still the same, deep, thoughtful, searching. He rose slowly, unsure if he could speak. "You're really here," he finally managed. "I promised I'd come back." They stood there a moment, the world holding still between them. Then she stepped forward, reached for his hand. "I'm not running anymore, Caleb." He took her hand, wrapped it in his. "Then stay." Her smile trembled. "I'd like to." He leaned in gently, just enough for his forehead to rest against hers. "You're home," he whispered. She closed her eyes. "So are you." That night, the garage glowed with golden light. The heater hummed, the loft filled with the sound of laughter and the scent of stew simmering on the stove. Lila read aloud from an old storybook. James fell asleep, curled under a quilt made of old flannel shirts. And in the quiet that followed, Caleb and Hannah sat by the window, shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped beneath the table. Neither spoke. They didn't have to, because some silences aren't empty. Some are sacred. The snow came soft and slow, like it was remembering something. It fell over Pine Hollow in thick, quiet flakes, wrapping the little town in a hush so deep even the wind seemed to tiptoe. It was the first true snow of winter, clean, undisturbed, and full of that strange magic only the first snowfall brings. A beginning, or maybe a return. From the loft window of the garage, Hannah watched it gather on the railing outside, her breath fogging the glass. Her arms were wrapped around herself, not from cold, but from something quieter. A warmth too new to trust completely. A life returned to, inch by inch. Behind her, Lila and James were sprawled on the floor with mismatched gloves, trying to figure out which snow boots belonged to whom. Lila laughed as James put his on the wrong feet again. "Let him be," Hannah said gently. "He likes them that way." "I like them funny," James declared, flopping onto his back in victory. Hannah smiled, but her eyes drifted back toward the window. Below in the garage, Caleb was pulling the cover off a car she hadn't seen in over a year. It was an old Ford, paint faded, tires slightly flat. She remembered how he'd used to work on it after dinner, sleeves rolled up, a stubborn lock of hair falling into his eyes. Not to fix it, just to keep it alive. Like him. Now, he was brushing off the snow with the same quiet care, moving slow, steady, like he was coaxing something back to life. She watched him a moment longer, then turned to the kids. "Coats on," she said. "We're going outside." The snow was deeper than she expected, crunchy beneath her boots, fresh enough to lift in soft plumes with every step. Lila ran ahead, spinning in lazy circles. James followed, immediately face-planting into a drift with a shriek of laughter. Caleb looked up from the hood of the Ford as they approached. He leaned his elbow against the fender, a wrench dangling loosely from his hand. "Well," he said, wiping his brow with a gloved thumb, "was beginning to think you'd send word from the window instead." "I don't send word," Hannah replied, tucking her scarf tighter. "I bring it." He raised an eyebrow. "And what's today's message?" She paused, her eyes finding his. "That we're really here now. For good." Caleb let the wrench fall to the bench. "You sure?" "I was halfway sure when I got out of the car," she said. "Mostly sure when I unpacked the last box. Completely sure when I woke up this morning and remembered I didn't want to be anywhere else." He looked at her, long and quiet, the kind of look that settled deep, like water finding its level. Then he nodded once, slow and warm. "Good. I've been saving your coffee mug." She laughed, soft, almost surprised. "You saved my mug?" He gestured toward the garage. "Top shelf, behind the peanut butter jar no one uses. I couldn't bring myself to wash it." Caleb," she said, stepping closer. "You don't wash anything unless it smokes or breaks." He grinned. "Guilty." Lila skated past them in her snow boots, dragging a branch behind her like a royal scepter. "This is my kingdom," she shouted, "and James is my knight." James, right on cue, galloped past on all fours, roaring. Hannah turned to watch them, her face softening. Then she looked back at Caleb. "They're happy here," she said quietly. "So am I." A pause. Then with hesitant certainty, she said, "I want to make it official." Caleb tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I want to register under my real name again," she said. "No more hiding. No more initials or codes or safe houses. Just, Hannah Whitaker, with the twins, living above a garage with a man who builds homes out of broken engines." Caleb blinked. "You sure about that last part? He sounds like a bit of a recluse." She stepped closer. "He's a good man. The kind who shows up when it's hard. The kind who never asks more than you're willing to give, but who deserves more than he knows." He looked down, breath fogging between them. "I wasn't sure I deserved any of this." "Well," she said, reaching up to touch his collar, "that's not your call anymore." Caleb looked up, and then finally he kissed her. It wasn't a grand thing. No music, no sweeping gestures. Just two people who had waited long enough for a life they never thought they'd have. It was slow, honest, like breathing for the first time after the storm passed. When they pulled apart, Hannah whispered, "Took you long enough." "I was waiting for the snow," he said. That night, the garage felt full again. The heater hummed. The loft glowed with golden light. Lila and James sprawled on the couch, watching old cartoons on a grainy little TV Caleb had dusted off. Hannah moved through the kitchen with sleeves rolled up, humming some long-forgotten tune. Caleb stood in the doorway, a cup of tea in his hand, just watching it all unfold. The noise, the warmth, the soft comfort of people belonging to each other. Hannah turned and caught him watching. "You okay?" He nodded. "Just making sure I'm not dreaming." She came over, leaned into him. "If you are, don't wake up." He smiled. "Deal." Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside the world was still and warm and whole, And for the first time in a long, long time, there was nothing left to fear. The scent of cinnamon and coffee lingered in the garage like a memory that didn't want to leave. It was Saturday morning, the sun stretching slow across the frosted windows. The snow from the night before still clung to the roof, but inside the world was warm, alive with soft footsteps, distant laughter, and the low hum of a record player spinning a song Caleb hadn't heard since before everything changed. The loft had become a home, not just a shelter or a stopgap, but a home. There were coats hanging on more than one hook now, a chipped mug collection growing by the sink. Lila's crayon drawings framed with tape on the fridge, a jar of mismatched screws on the table, James's latest treasure, and everywhere, traces of Hannah. She was at the kitchen counter, wearing Caleb's old flannel shirt over a cotton dress, stirring oatmeal with one hand and balancing a sleeping James on her hip. Lila sat at the table, boots dangling, munching toast and telling a story that involved dragons, tow trucks, and a heroic squirrel named Max. Caleb stood near the garage door, wiping his hands on a rag after finishing a tire change, watching it all from a distance like a man still getting used to the sound of joy echoing in his own walls. Hannah looked up and caught his gaze. "You're staring again," she said, smiling. "I do that a lot lately." "Well," she said, lowering James into the big armchair near the fire, "you've got something worth staring at now." He chuckled, walking toward her. "You think so?" She turned to face him fully. "I know so." There was a softness between them now, not fragile but lived in. It didn't need declarations or grand gestures. It lived in small things, the way she handed him his coffee without asking, the way he fixed the lock on the bathroom door without her needing to mention it. They had found their rhythm, quiet and deep. Later that afternoon, they took the kids sledding on the hill behind the garage. The air was sharp and clean, the sky a hard blue above snow that sparkled like powdered glass. Caleb pulled James in a plastic sled while Hannah and Lila raced ahead, cheeks pink with laughter. When they reached the top of the hill, Caleb sat beside Hannah on a tree stump, watching the kids tumble down the slope in shrieks and giggles. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" she asked, breath misting in the cold air. Caleb smiled. "Sometimes. Then James eats glue or Lila sticks a pine cone in the toaster, and I remember why silence is overrated." She laughed, head tilting back, eyes bright. "They're happy." "They are." She looked at him then, serious. "You make them feel safe, Caleb." "So do you." She took a long breath, eyes scanning the horizon. "For a long time, I didn't think we'd get here. Not just physically, but emotionally. I didn't think I'd ever stop holding my breath." "You're not holding it now." "No," she smiled. "Now I'm finally breathing again." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Then let's keep breathing," he said. That evening, after the kids had fallen asleep curled on the couch beneath a quilt Caleb's mother had made years ago, Hannah and Caleb stood on the front porch, watching the snow drift silently from the night sky. The stars were out, clear and sharp. Hannah sipped tea from the mug he'd once saved for her, the one she left behind and now claimed again with ease. "I keep thinking about how far we've come," she said softly. "From that night on the tracks to this." "I think about it too. You found me," she said, "when I didn't even know I needed to be found." "You weren't lost," he replied. "You were surviving. There's a difference." She looked up at him. "And you? What were you doing?" He hesitated, then said, "Waiting," without knowing what for. She smiled, stepping closer, placing a hand on his chest. "Well, I'm here now. I know. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm counting on that." Inside, the fire crackled low. Hannah turned to go back in, then paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Caleb," she said. He looked over. "Would you ever consider—" She hesitated, nervous in a way that didn't suit her. "Would you ever think about making this official? I mean, not just us, but the kids too? A real family on paper, not just in feeling." He stepped toward her, heart catching in his chest. "You mean—" "I mean adoption," she said gently. "And maybe something more. Down the line." He didn't speak right away, just looked at her with something vast in his eyes. Then without a word, he nodded. "I already feel like their father," he said softly. "But yes, I'd be honored to be it in name too." She exhaled, smile trembling. "Then let's do it." He leaned in, kissed her forehead. We already did. Weeks passed. Papers were filed, forms signed, lawyers called. It wasn't glamorous, but it was sacred, a different kind of vow. On a Thursday morning in the modest courthouse of Rutledge County, a judge smiled down from the bench, glanced at the squirming twins, then looked to Caleb. Do you promise to love, support, and protect these children as your own? I already do, Caleb said. Then he turned to Hannah. And you, he whispered, taking her hand, are the reason I'm whole again. She squeezed his fingers. You were never broken. You just needed someone to remind you. They walked out of the courthouse into a fresh blanket of snow. The kids danced ahead, throwing handfuls of powder into the air like confetti. Hannah and Caleb stood on the steps a moment longer, watching them. Two little hearts who'd known too much fear, now wrapped in something stronger than safety. Belonging. Hannah leaned into Caleb, her voice low. We're home now. He nodded, his voice rough. At last. We'd love to know, where are you listening from? And how did this story make you feel? If it touched your heart or reminded you of someone you care about, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your words mean more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, about love, hope, and quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling stories that matter. Thank you truly for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care and stay warm.